Yeah, we killed the Spring Bank 10, so now we're going to move up to the Spring Bank 15.
Very nice.
Depending on how Katie does on this, we will. You'll see if I hit the sauce pretty hard. Hey, everybody, I'm Shane.
It's comforting. I'm Katie.
So today we're going to kind of resurrect an old webcast that we did a while back because there's new versions of AutoCAD and specifically Revit, which is a very popular, at least a popular request.
Neat piece of software.
Yeah, no, it is. And Autodesk products have historically had a very involved and difficult to deploy set of applications. So they finally, as we discussed a long time ago, they have a cool wizard that you can use to prepare your deployment. But there are some changes, some of them fairly subtle, that we thought it's worth it. So if you need to get these products out, even if you don't, this is a good tutorial on just how to troubleshoot and build these packages for yourself. All right. So this is Katie's boat.
Yep. So we're going to go in and talk about parameters, the least visually interesting part of our program today. So that would be me. I doubt that. If you have watched the webcast or have dealt with Autodesk products for a while, you're probably familiar with how often they change little tiny things. This is one of those subtle changes that you'll want to be aware of. I have built a package. We're going to hop in here and give you something cool to look at. So these are our 3 most interesting parameters. W, QB, and I. The W parameter, while possibly not case sensitive, it's always a good idea to watch the case. In this case, we found that capital W works quite nicely. Mm-hmm. So the W parameter is responsible for instructing the deployment to wait for each individual component to finish installing before starting the next one. Without that, you get a mishmash of stuff happening at once, and then reasonably quick afterwards, a failure.
Okay. So it is important that /W and it used to be that was case sensitive. It may not be.
It may be. You're welcome to tinker with it.
Yeah,
I didn't tinker scientifically with it.
There was a point, and it's interesting throughout these different versions of Autodesk products. Sometimes these change slightly, but I do remember when W was case sensitive. So just be on the safe side and do a /W.
The next parameter, QB, is going to look familiar because it follows the trend of MSI parameters.
It does.
A QB is a quiet basic UI, which it'll give you progress bars.
Yes,
and some other visual.
Depending on how you have your deployment set up to run as. Now, we have QB set up for troubleshooting purposes. You can also do /Q, which is probably what you're going to end up doing once you get your packages, your Revit packages dialed in. What we don't want you to do is QN. That used to be.
In 2017, weirdly enough, QN worked
what was
and
needed.
Q did not.
And QN means absolutely no UI. So that, once again, these are MSI basic. It's /Q for quiet, and then you can even break it down. The N and the B, no UI versus B. There's going to be status bars, but no input is requested. So /Q or QB. What we're going to do, while you're troubleshooting it, I'd recommend just doing a QB, and we'll show you why. But go ahead. Go ahead.
Our last interesting parameter is the /I. That capital I, or that I, will tell setup.exe that an INI config file is coming. And the I introduces another interesting concept of what to do with spaces in paths. If your path to your UNC location has a space in the path, you'll want to surround the path to setup in quotes, but not the path to the INI file in quotes. I experienced 1603 errors. You may very well experience the same.
Even so, basically, anything after the /I, if it has a space as part of the path, don't worry about encapsulating that in double quotes. Just, I believe the way they built this is I literally just expects a path, and it will
read till it sees
basically, it's probably using your regular expression. Just keep on going until you see a .ini. And then at that point, a space should follow whatever the last I there on INI. So you should be good, but just keep that in mind. I know it's common You see a space, you put quotes around it. Don't do that on the path for the INI, only for the EXE. But we'll talk about how we even got that INI. You might be going, okay, where is this INI? How do I find it? You get it generated. Lex,
I just gotta, forgive my squirrely ignorance, but couldn't you just do this in an install step and put all those parameters on the parameter line?
Very good
Totally
point.
could.
Very good point. So notice we are using a command step, not an install step. An install step is normally what is used to install applications, especially when you're specifying an EXE or an MSI or something. Why do you think we're using a command step this time?
In this case, we're using a command step, and we're using a pull copy mode for efficiency. When you do an install step, especially with a push copy mode, your PDQ console machine is going to take the 11 gigabytes worth of Revit install files and copy them individually, one by one, to each target machine that you're deploying to, which for your network bandwidth is not going to be very comfortable.
Yes, agreed. So in this case, we just found it a little better to use the command step.
Yep.
Right.
So you'll deploy this to your target machine, and your PDQ console machine will tell each target to reach out to the file server or other network location and pull down the files that it needs.
Okay.
So
I like that. I like that. So once again, if you want to know how to create a command step, you just new step command. But how did we get this? How did you know that this was the command to use?
We are going to get to that in a moment. First, we're going to go through the Network Deployment Wizard, which is what Shane mentioned was Autodesk's tool to create a deployment. So I've got over here, out on my file server, the Revit 2018 install files.
Yeah, those are the installation files.
Yep, these are what you grab out of, I can't remember if it's an ISO or a zip file. It's probably an ISO because they're gigantic. But I've got down here setup.exe. This is fresh and straight from Autodesk and different from what is referenced in my package. So we're going to open this guy up and walk through the options available when installing.
Yes. So this is once again we're not installing it right now. We are preparing it to be deployed.
Yep.
And they've got this handy little wizard that where yes, from here you can say I want to deploy it or I want to install it on this on this machine that you're running it from. But we don't want to do that. We want to create a deployment.
So this will be the same thing if you were at any point used
move
to.
out of the way so you can see that. See that install? That's what you don't want to click on unless you're installing it on that particular computer.
Nope. We're going to instead create a deployment. This is punctuated with lots of waiting, so if you're using a slow machine, find yourself a sandwich.
And I want to state that we already have a deployment built using this because this does take a while. We're going to show you the steps that you'll take to create this, but we've already got it, so you don't. Yep. We're not going to have to just sit there and wait.
Bore you with the details.
Like the cooking show. These are the ingredients. Turn around, put it in the oven, and pull out the...
Yeah, it's the Martha Stewart thing, as JJ mentioned. So here you're going to name your installation. You'll have to reference this a little later on. We're calling it Revit 2018.
Yep.
You'll notice the one that we've got, we just don't have a space in there. But
yep. By habit, I put a space in there. Probably should have. So I'm going to tell it that I copy this because I like copy pasting. So this will be where your machines will access the deployment. This is where the setup.exe will be found. A couple folders.
As well as all the install files, including
config
all
files.
the prerequisites. So this you need to have a lot of space. We're talking like around 11 gigs or so for this Revit 2018. So once again, we're going to specify where we're building this deployment. Where are those install files going to live?
Yep. So I've put them out on a network share. An important thing to mention there is to make sure that your target machines and your deploy user account have access to get to these files. Otherwise, you'll run into some other installation errors. And bonus points if you're using a DFS share, because you'll see in a minute the Revit install is about between 11 and 12 gigs. And if you've got other sites and you have DFS set up, it'll be a lot more efficient.
if you have multiples, if you have one site, DFS is not really necessary. But if you have a lot of sites separated by slower WAN links, and you want to set up your DFS namespaces. We have videos for that.
In the bonus content.
Yeah, that Lex has done. They're a little aged, I think, but...
I'm timeless, my friend. Timeless.
You look the same. You've looked the same since you were 4.
Just horrible all this time? Windows certainly hasn't.
Windows has changed. Lex hasn't.
Just a little
He looks
bit.
the same as when I saw him riding his bike on his way to his karate lesson. when we were in 7th grade.
Still jacked, just 6 foot.
So the other important thing to notice here is to run the installation in silent mode. Obviously, without silent mode, your deployment isn't going to behave quite like you expect it to.
Correct. Very important. The log files.
Yes.
You have a couple of options. What do you suggest?
During testing, we suggest that you let this network log file exist, but if you've got your deployment all sorted out, all of your ducks are in a row, and you're happy with everything and ready to send it out to all of your users and your target machines, go ahead and remodify the deployment and take off the network log file. So it's one log file for all of your machines, and there may be some, like you said at one point, a traffic cop that's babysitting that file and making sure that everybody writes to it in an appropriate order.
Sequentially. What you don't want is, and we haven't tested this, if you deploy this out to 200 machines, wow, 200 Revit licenses, that's got to be pricey. And they're all trying to log. I don't know how it's going to work. They might have a process that literally protects this, but if you're trying to have all these machines write to this file at once, I could see some locking issues. So anyway, just keep that in mind. We haven't tested that out.
Yeah, the other important one is to let it create a log file in each individual workstation. The log files are long and verbose and potentially frightening, but they do have really good information. So especially while you're testing, or if anything interesting happens during your deployment, the log files will tell you what went wrong.
Pour a drink and enjoy that log file.
When it says on this second option here where it says create a log file in each workstation's temp folder, that would be the temp folder of the deploy user. So if Katie's using her credentials to deploy to Mark's computer and there's something that goes wrong, Katie needs to go and access her temp folder, not Mark's. So she'll have to go into her profile on that machine to read that, because it's, once again, it goes to the temp folder respective to the user that's running it, in this case the deploy user.
Yep, so we're happy with this screen. You can read this on your own time. Nobody wants to watch me read that at all. So here's where you set up your licensing information, whether you have one license for your one user of AutoCAD or Revit, or you've got a server on your network to babysit all of your licensing. You can pick your poison here. I'm not going to show you our serial number, so I'm going to choose an Autodesk ID because it'll let me click the next button.
That's fine. If you don't supply that, it will install this in trial mode.
It will. Yep.
Which obviously is good enough, but just make sure you enter it. You should have those codes.
Yep. The network deployment creation process is punctuated with brief periods of time where the window leaves. So it is doing stuff in the background. In the meantime, while we wait for that to pop up, I'm going to show you some files that get created as part of your deployment. So I've got here in my deployment folder, this is an existing deployment that I created a little while ago. And you'll see that there's a shortcut here. And it's back.
Yeah. The shortcut is where you're going to grab that path that you saw in the command line.
Yep, this was something that was probably originally created so that you could go out and click on that, and it would walk through the install, it would do an unattended install for you.
You would have that link, that shortcut available to all your users and that need it, and just say go double click this, and this will be silently installed on your computer.
Yep, and it would be. I'll open Notepad so that you can see it a little bit bigger.
So she goes to the properties of that LNK file, of that shortcut. Grabs the path, and this should look somewhat familiar to you.
Yep, it should, because it's almost exactly what I put in here. So this would, because of the QB, if your user were to run this, or if you were to run this, you'd get a visual representation of the
status,
the green bar is ticking along, and then they include the trial parameter. There are several. There's a support forum and another article on Autodesk's site that says if you've entered a valid license in, the trial parameter won't.
You're not going to go into
it won't affect you in any way. So
we do need to add a /W to this.
That is one thing that's missing.
Since we are going to be deploying it. So you add that /W. Once again, the Q or the QB. We suggest the QB only for testing purposes right now.
Yep. So we've got WQI.
That's what we need.
All the parameters like we need in our.
So you would copy and paste that into your command step.
Yep. I have already copy pasted it in there. So we've got. This is our package built and ready to go.
But we did kind of jump the gun because we were waiting for that window to pop up. So let's take a step back and go to that window. And this is where you define what you want in Revit. Obviously, you want the main Revit, but then there's additional options to choose.
Yep, you've got obviously the components that you're probably familiar with, especially if you've been administering this for a little while. One thing that I'm going to walk through right now is the process to add add-ons or updates. So when I walked through this before with my existing deployment that I've already created, I have added the 2018.2 update and then the Site Designer add-on. So
if you're doing this for new machines, this might be a good thing for you to do, not only to install the update, or not only to install Revit, but any updates that have been released since Revit 2018 came out. So this is how you can do that. This is one way you can do it, by making it part of this initial deployment. Another way you could do it, if you wanted, was just install Revit and then have another package that has those Revit updates that you'll then deploy out to those Revit machines. But you want to show adding one real quick?
yeah, this is a great way to get the deployment all built out for new installs. But if we go up a couple directories, I'm here in my deployment directory where all of the files are. In the IMG directory is an updates directory, and in there is a long string of characters, I believe is what Autodesk refers to it as, which is where they'll dump the files in there. One thing, if you're adding add-ons, you may want to check with Autodesk on their support site somewhere, give them a call, and make sure that there aren't any parameters, because you have to supply the update file, obviously, so that it has something to install. But just like building a deployment package in PDQ Deploy, you have to supply silent install parameters, otherwise your deployment won't behave as you expect it to.
And if it's one of their EXEs updates, what's the parameter for that?
This one is quiet.
So it's a /quiet?
If I click in the box, I can type it so that you can see it too. So this one specifically is quiet. The MSIs, they recommend putting the install dir parameter to install the update or the add-on into your Autodesk file.
Okay.
There's another link in the bonus content that has the process, as well as two important considerations for two of the add-ons for Revit 2018 specifically.
Right on. So we'll just add this one for right now. Is that what you want to do? Okay.
Yep. So.
And then you have to notice the create button, if you can see behind me, or remove, the create button's grayed out. It's going to be grayed out until you collapse any of these options. So once we collapse this one, the include additional software,
yep,
then it's saying, okay, is this how you want it, that the path that you want, etc. Go ahead and you would hit create. Now we've already done this before. This takes a while.
It takes a while, like go to lunch and come back. It takes a while. So
we can just go ahead and cancel if you want.
Yep, I'm going to get that out of the way because we are done with it.
So we'll take that as read and then say, now this is the install files that you showed. Go ahead and right over here.
Yep.
That's what is created. We went into Revit properties, that link, grabbed that path, modified it, added the /w, and put that in a command step.
Yep. If you are running that network deployment wizard for the first time, you'll have to go all the way through the process, and then at the end, once you have come back and it's finished creating the deployment, you'll have the option there to open the update manager to grab any of the add-ons or the updates that you want, and then you have to modify that deployment again to add the update files in. So it's a little bit more of a process than we went through, just because it's time consuming and rather uninteresting to show.
I would actually, and for me, like I say, I just want to get Revit out and then have another package that contains all the updates. You don't have to have all the updates in a separate package. You can throw them together and have them run sequentially. But I just want to make sure Revit gets out there.
Yep, they've got the bulk of it already, and they just need a little bit of housekeeping afterwards.
Yeah. It's making it as removing as much complexity as possible. So.
Yep. So a couple other things that are worth noting in the deployment directory or the SCCM scripts. If you open these up and look at them, you can find the prerequisites. Prerequisites are a very important part of any Autodesk deployment, because if your prerequisites are not there or you haven't built them into the deployment properly, you will probably get some very odd
and one thing that surprised us, and according to some of the Autodesk forums, if you had, there are certain components like DirectX that might require you to have .NET Framework 3.5, and so if you don't have, this is one of the reasons why we're suggesting having a QB just to watch on your test deployments before you push this out in production. Run this interactively. We'll show you how to do that, because if something like .NET 3.5 is required and doesn't exist, then a window will pop up and just say you need 3.5. And if you're running this totally hidden, the user will never see that, and your deployment will time out.
Yep, you will go. It times out for sure.
Okay.
But you can see that it is a prompt that you can either walk through or correct. So this is where you'd find the prerequisites. This is also where you'd find each individual component if you're really interested in the details. And then in the tools directory, you can launch this shortcut to modify a deployment already, or launch the update manager if you want to grab updates.
That's if you wanted to add the updates as part of this deployment.
Or download the updates to update them.
Yeah, in this case for Revit, you have to download each update individually, and then you'd have to go back and modify what you had just built. So.
Yep, so in the IMG folder is where our setup.exe and our, oops, that's the wrong INI, that INI file. Those are our two important files that we need for our deployment. That's where we found them if you are interested to build our package. So there's our package.
Do you want to just, and I know it takes, in our lab around 40 minutes or so, so we're not going to just sit there and
No, it takes a little while.
Playing. Do you want to kick one off at all? And really quick before we do that, I want to show you. So if you do keep the QB, once again, that's for troubleshooting purposes. On this step, go over to Options, and under the on this command step, go to the Options tab, and run as. We've changed it from Deploy User to Deploy User Interactive. What that does is you can do a remote desktop or look at the machine that you're deploying to. If someone's logged on, you'll see the status of, with that QB and Deploy User Interactive, you'll see the status of the deployment going. And you'll be able to see if something does in fact, go ahead and move that over a little bit, if something does in fact cause an error or anything that pops up saying, hey, I need this, then you got to fix that before you send out a silent deployment. You can't drive that home enough.
I heard you guys right. That takes 40 minutes to install, and we got a fast lab. So wouldn't people want to consider changing their timeout on this package so it doesn't time out?
You're probably right. I'll show you what I did earlier, which was I forgot to change the timeout so that I didn't have to watch a 2-hour installation timeout. So it will take quite a long time.
Yes, thank you, Lex. Let the record show that Lex brought up a good point.
Mark one for me. Woohoo!
We'll leave that in the background and kick over to it in a minute and go back to the package.
So if you want to change the default timeout for a deployment is an hour. When we say for a deployment, you can that 1 hour starts when the first step copies the files it needs on a target. Once those are copied down and that instruction is kicked off for that first step, that's when the timer begins.
Yep.
It's not if a computer is in a queued state because you're doing 200 computers and it only grabs 8 or 16, whatever you have configured at a time. Those queued, they don't start counting that hour. That hour is per target once it starts. But 40 minutes for us in a fairly fast lab. Here's how you would change it. So you don't have to change your global timeout properties.
No.
Just go to the properties of your package here.
Yep. Go to properties and then adjust. You have to check this use custom timeout box and then fill in whatever appropriate time is.
The value that would be shown there is what's in preferences for your default timeout. Here we just added 60 minutes, so we have 120 minutes.
Hey, okay, so the follow-up to that is, okay, so let's say it times out. Is that still going to be running on that end user's machine and it could very well finish?
No.
No?
Okay, so there's a lot of timing here. That's a good question. That's a good question, Lex. I'd like to explain how that works. If something times out, your PDQ Deploy server is going to send an instruction down to that target to say stop. Now, if that target is just barely finishing and just hasn't communicated back to the console, then you would still have Revit installed successfully. We just would show that it timed out. But that's a pretty narrow window. Usually, if it's partway through the installation and we say stop, it'll give the instruction. Pretty soon, that runner process will just stop, and you could just have a partial installation, which is a problem. So it is important, and thank you for bringing that up, Lexathon. It is important to increase your timeout, and that also goes for like Windows updates, especially those big cumulative updates for Windows 7. can be known to take a while.
Office
those,
installs.
yeah,
right.
those you might
Yep.
want to increase those.
I see in the chat somebody mentioned SolidWorks.
Yeah,
That's a
SolidWorks is a
long-
big one.
long
So you
install
can
as
see
well.
here, this is a tiny Rick that we are deploying to, and this is with a QB and with Deploy User Interactive. We can see the status going on, but the important thing is, if there was a problem, a window would be popped up saying, here it is, and we can go, oh, we don't have .NET 3.5, or oh, it looks like Visual C++ 2005 took a dive, and you can troubleshoot from that point.
Yep, great for other troubleshooting.
But once you've got it dialed in, what you can do, if I may, what you can do, you're like, okay, I've pushed this out to a few machines, I like it, it works. Then you can just come back over here if you want, go to your step, change this from Deploy User Interactive to just, Deploy User. That means it will run silently. And then go back over to the details and remove that B so that it's just a /Q. Do not, once again, do QN. That used to be the way it was
It's not
last
the way
year.
for 2018.
Now it's just a Q or QB. And,
Yep.
that should work for you. And by the way, if you keep QB and interactive, should be okay. Even if someone's not logged in, you should be okay. It's just if someone is logged in, they'll see a status and they might be going, what's going on? I don't understand.
It may confuse end users.
Go ahead and
Always a good line.
hit save on that one.
Save that up, and then the next package that I've already built and sent out is the two
Actually,
files.
may I interrupt you one thing?
Yes.
You may have noticed in this package that we created, we have a couple of other steps here, pre-steps. A reboot. You might be going, whoa, dude, you're starting with a reboot. Why is that important? And we'll tell you, you're not going to be rebooting every machine necessarily. Why is that important?
The Autodesk installers are rather finicky if the machine has a pending reboot, whether it's a reboot that was caused by a previous Autodesk install or something common like Windows updates or another application.
There's deep in the bowels of the registry, there's a registry key that is used to store instructions on, hey, this computer needs a reboot, and included in that are, and the reason for it is, after it reboots, take these files and replace them with these files, right? Once we see those flags, and you can check that out in PDQ inventory. It's just if your machine is pending a reboot, what error message could you see if you try to deploy to it?
That one's most likely going to be a 1618, which is just a normal MSI installer, but it has indicated typically that a machine has a pending Autodesk installation.
So here's what we've done. In the reboot, we are not just saying reboot everybody. We're
suddenly.
using conditions, and the conditions we're saying there's a PDQ inventory. So this does require PDQ inventory. We're saying this computer is a member of the PDQ inventory collection reboot required.
Which is a collection.
There it
It's
is
not
right there.
a member of the collection library, but it is a collection that ships by default.
Yeah,
with
it's
inventory.
just built in there, and that follows. It's a good idea to scan your systems, especially for Autodesk installs, any Autodesk applications. Scan those systems with inventory before you deploy, because if they do require a reboot, they will be popped into this reboot required collection. So here, if a computer has been scanned and is not in this collection, according to our scan, it doesn't need a reboot, it will skip this step. And the same for the sleep. The sleep, we're just giving it a couple extra, what do we say? I
think it was like 60 seconds.
60 seconds.
Yeah,
We're
just
just
a
giving
little
a
more
few
time.
extra seconds after it reboots to stabilize. But the conditions there are also, it has to be a member of reboot required. And then that's why we're doing that. It's really to get a higher success rate. Do we have any questions?
Dear Shane and Katie, AutoCAD and Revit installs user-specific settings and items in the Nerd folder when the user first launches the program. How can you pre-populate those items and folders so you can add customized settings for each program? Thanks, Dustin M.
I can give this a shot unless you want to answer.
No, go for it.
So I have tried this not with Autodesk. I've tried this in the past with different applications, and I've had mixed results. As part of the deployment, there's no native way of doing it. You're going to have to find some common folders or files and then copy them out, and you would have to traverse the user's directory. There's some scripting involved. I personally wouldn't recommend it. I would just let, when that user first runs it, Autodesk products will say this user needs these files. So there is going to take some time for initializing, a little longer the first time a user runs it. If you really want to do it, you're going to have to dial in what you want copied
and who you want it copied to. It's
Or-
great if you have only one user per machine and you know.
Yes, if they share machines, which I don't think AutoCAD users generally share machines. That's usually some help desk function, but you're going to have to make sure it goes into their respective user directory. That's why you'd probably traverse the directories and just say, here's some files for you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it. Like I say, I've done it before, and I've had mixed results. Meaning, sometimes it's worked, and sometimes it just seriously hasn't. There's actually been some corruption on the application where the application's like, this is a corrupt DAT file or something. So I don't know. I would not recommend doing that. Are there any other questions?
Dear Shane and Katie, what are some of the common exit codes for Revit 2018? I have been using 016413010, but my deployments continuously time out and never report a successful install, even though they are successfully installed. Thanks, Kyle L.
I have not noticed any common success codes. I noticed plenty of error codes because I tried to break it every which way to Saturday. So
Okay, so if it's installing and it just will time out, then there's obviously a problem. What we're doing, by we I mean the runner process, Kyle. The runner process is waiting for a return code. So if the computer just does an immediate reboot right after, that sometimes will not send a return code, and Deploy will think, oh, there's a problem. Yeah, I'm still waiting for something. A common Autodesk error is it 259?
259.
259, and I've seen people in the past say, you know what, every time I get a 259, it still works, so I'm going to mark that as a success. Here's why you wouldn't want to have 259 as a success. That usually means that you didn't have the /W parameter in there, and it was trying to install
Everything all at once.
all these different prerequisites at once, and
Somebody returned a code to Deploy, and Deploy took that as a finished deployment, but nothing happened.
And maybe, Kyle, try increasing your timeout a little bit and see what happens. If you're still seeing this behavior, we would love it if you would send your Revit package. I think you said it was Revit.
Export
it. Don't send all the install files.
No, please.
Yeah, to export to export a file, please. To export a file, just right-click on a file and say export, and that will create an XML file. You can send that to us. We can look at the parameters that you're using and maybe point you in the right direction somewhere.
Yeah, grab a Coke, go through your log files, see if there's anything indicating in there what happened. It'll often in the install logs list an error code to tell you what happened.
Grab a Coke, not do a line of Coke, right?
No.
I was going to say grab a
Grab a pop.
scotch, a tall pour.
I was trying to be safe for work.
Figure she was doing Rails at work or something. I don't know. All right.
Gets you through.
The least hip person here.
You're all right. Do we have any more questions?
Dear Shane and Katie, I have run into multiple problems in previous years with the Autodesk Desktop app being running during an installation, causing it to fail. Could you go over how to kill that process before the installation step takes place? Thanks, G.
Sure.
Yes.
So you can create a. Go ahead and close that.
That's not the one.
That's not a knife. Go ahead and open up your Revit there. So if you'll see this in a couple. In fact, if you download, there's a number of packages in the package library where we take. It might be a little brute force-ish, but we also have to build packages for the lowest common denominator. There are times where you just simply can't update a certain application on top of itself while it's running. So we'll send a kill command to it.
If you want a good example of a command step to kill the task, grab one of the Java packages. And if you want a good example of how to use PowerShell to do that, grab the BandyZip package.
So here, just so you know, you make sure to move this up in your, to the proper location. Actually, if it's a reboot, then it's going to be rebooted anyway. But if this doesn't reboot, what you would do in this command step, if you're using command step, is type in task kill. This is a Windows, this is just an old Windows utility that's built in. Task kill.exe, and it's a /im, and then after that you'd put the name of the process. So I'm not sure what it's called. It's like Revit.exe or something like that. So you'd put your name, whatever.exe, and then I believe it's a /f.
For force.
For force, yeah. Otherwise, a question that they'll never see will pop up. Are you sure you want to kill this? Whenever you do a task kill, it's important to change your success code to add 128 to it.
Just in case it didn't find the task.
Because if that task isn't running, then as far as this is concerned, as far as your goal is concerned, it's successful. A task wasn't running. I wanted to make sure it was killed if it was. 128 is the task kill return code for, hey, there was nothing to kill. So you want that marked as a success. And then, of course, a lot of people are just starting to move to the PowerShell. There we go.
Yep,
So,
those two examples, Java and BandyZip.
you don't have to worry about the 128 if you do.
Nope, PowerShell's a little friendlier.
Yeah, well, because it handles return codes completely differently. If Chris were sitting in the chair right now, the light would be
Corgi.
PowerShell.
PowerShell.
And here's why. We love you, Chris. We miss you, especially in light of the fact that Lex is taking your place.
Ow, harsh.
Love you, Lex.
So harsh, but true.
Ish. Well, add an ish to it.
Yeah, there it goes.
Corgi.
You mentioned why we're laughing.
He's here with us.
Did someone
instead.
throw out? Did someone throw out the kill for PowerShell? Anyway, do we have another question, or do you want us to move on? We're getting near the end. All right.
All right, so let's look at the update, since we mentioned way back at the beginning how to install the updates aside from building them into your gigantic 11 gigabyte deployment.
Go out, grab that updater file.
Yep.
Katie
You're
showed
still
you how
going
to
to have to
navigate
go
to
and
it.
launch the application update to grab the files and bring them down. I believe there's another way using the Autodesk app, but I haven't tried that because...
But once you get those updates, here she's got a package that has 2 updates, right? The first one you can see, go ahead and go to.
This is the same update that I built into the other deployment.
It's an
This
EXE.
is just on its own.
Yeah.
This is 2018.2.exe. And this is its silent parameter like I entered into the deployment wizard.
And then this one's an MSI.
Yep.
All right.
The article, I believe, that's in the bonus content mentions that most of these will be MSIs, and that the MSIs want this install dir parameter
And if
to
you
tell
want-
it where to put the files.
And if you want to know what I always love how you say install dir. If you want the install dir, we're going to fight afterwards. If you want to modify the install dir, what do you put there? When you created the deployment in the deployment wizard, right at the bottom, one of the options was what path do you want to go to, and it was the default is C program files, Autodesk. So just grab that as well. And since there's a space, notice we've added the spaces. If you can see that, we've added the spaces to.
Yep, and the quotes. I actually just copy pasted that straight from Autodesk's site
That's
because
cool.
I'm.
This is basically you have to, if you're using an MSI, just according to Autodesk, modify the installed property.
Yep,
gonna
and
start-
it's happy with the same parameters that deploy fills in for you. If you look at the command line box.
I'm going to start calling it dire, as in directory.
There's going to be a 3-way fight going on there.
Let's do it.
This
We
is going to be
take
a
things-
rumble in the parking lot at 3 p.m.
Rumble at PDQ. I love
Yep.
it.
So both of those installed pretty quickly. I pushed it out to Morty, who has a test who I've been testing on.
I think it's important to note that if you are installing this on machines that have an existing version of Revit, according to our testing, this will install Revit 2018 alongside your previous installation.
Yep.
At least we tested it with a 2014 install, right?
Morty has 2014 installed, 2018 installed fairly happily, and
And it
accepted
just-
the updates.
They had both. This user had both 2014 and 2018. I haven't tested it on 2017. I don't think it will upgrade. It probably will just install alongside of it. That does mean that in inventory, if you use an inventory program, that machine will show that it has multiple versions of Revit. You'll want to go and uninstall the older versions if that's something you're interested in.
Yep. you get this beautiful long list of
Yeah, look at all those.
Autodesk applications and prerequisites.
I love
So,
it. All
Morty
right.
has both existing side by side. It's always worth checking with Autodesk to make sure that the two versions of your users need an older version for older functionality and the newer version for newer functionality. Check to make sure that they will exist harmoniously on the same machine.
Sounds
Just
good.
to be safe.
If you guys have any questions, please hit up our support site. And thank you for watching, seriously. And Katie, rock on, man. You did a good job. I'm Shane.
And I'm Katie.
Talk to you later.
Thanks for joining our webcast today. Congratulations, Dustin M. and Kyle L., winners of PDQ swag. Send us your info at webcast@pdq.com. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you back here next week.